Hey guys, welcome back to the Another Excuse podcast. I'm your host, Byron, and today's guest is Jack Cregan. Jack is a pretty impressive entrepreneur. He successfully exited his last company for $9 million and is now working on some really interesting companies in the payment sector. In this episode, we discuss how Jack got started and how the book The Secret influenced the trajectory of his life and how he made the decision to commit to business and go full steam ahead. We talk about the different businesses and projects that he worked on to learn everything he knows about business and how he got to where he is today. We also talk about the advice that he'd give to young entrepreneurs considering starting and how he'd do it if he started all again. It's a really interesting conversation. I think you're going to get a lot of value from this one. Enjoy the show. Hey Jack, thanks for joining me today. Now, you've had quite the entrepreneurial journey and you're only 25, so you've started a few companies and exited one successfully. To give a bit of context, can you tell us a bit about what you're working on at the moment? We'll go from there.
Yeah, of course I can. Probably started entrepreneurship when I was 17 years old. Been a bunch of up and downs, probably 6 different businesses in the meantime. Some were great successes, some not so much. Right now, specifically, I'm working on credit card invoice factoring type company. It's quite a complex one, but I can go into the weeds of it if you want and how it came about. And I'm also working on a fintech type rewards company, which is also a company that will need a little bit of explanation, but this is essentially like tying consumers' bank transactions back to rewards customized to their specific spend habits, essentially. So they're two primary projects I'm working on right now.
Awesome. And before we dive deeper into those current projects, I'd like to go back a bit and discuss the company that you successfully exited, Rebills. Could you explain a bit about how that exit went and how Rebills came about?
I sure can. It probably all started back when I first got into business, and one of my leading businesses was e-commerce and dropshipping. I think a lot of people, when they start going into business, they get into the YouTube world of how to make money online. They'll come across like the e-commerce gurus, how to dropship, etc. And I definitely fell right into that trap. And luckily, I came out the other side with some success, because it can be quite challenging to make stuff work because it's expensive, ads are tricky, etc. I just happened to stumble upon a couple of good products. The issue with e-commerce and dropshipping is, especially when you're a young and naive business person, you kind of don't fully understand the intricacies of suppliers, shipping times, consumer expectations, etc. So I made a couple of mistakes where I shipped the products from China and the consumers would get extremely frustrated about the shipping times naturally. So what would end up happening always is I'd have issues with my payment processors, specifically Stripe and PayPal at the time, where they wouldn't be too on board with the model, and they still aren't to this day, where if a product is coming from overseas, Stripe don't have much control over like logistics, supplies, etc. So they don't know what's going to happen to your chargeback ratios and your fraud ratios in your accounts. So I'd always have slightly elevated dispute ratios on my accounts because the products would be late or whatever the case may be. So what I ended up doing was building a bunch of relationships with banks across the US that were more tolerant to these types of business models. So if you think about like nutraceutical businesses, pharmacies, they'd be classified as more high-risk business models, and Stripe would never support them. So we essentially found these banks and we started working with them to help us process our e-commerce transactions and give us more consistency around payment processing. Because ultimately, if you can't accept a credit card or a PayPal transaction, your business isn't going to work out, especially if it's online. And we forged brilliant relationships with these banks, and we were able to like scale up our e-commerce businesses more and more every year. And then what would happen is friends of mine in the industry would say, how are you processing your payments so efficiently with your business model, etc.? And then we'd make introductions to the banks. And that's kind of where the business model for Rebills, which was ultimately like a checkout and a payment page CRM type business, came about. We'd connect these businesses to the banks, and then we ended up going slightly deeper, and we built the infrastructure for them to connect the banks to their websites through payment pages. And that's essentially what Rebills was from when we started it back in 2021, I believe. And we scaled it probably over the course of 2 years. It was all organic growth. It came from referrals. We did no outbound marketing, just because it solved such a core pain point in the industry we were in, which was drop shipping and slightly higher risk business models. And we ran it for about 2 years. We were very fortunate to grow super aggressively, extremely profitable business model. And we then put it on the market, and we were extremely fortunate to get like some brilliant offers in. And one of the offers came in, we just couldn't resist, and we ended up selling the business back in October 2023.
Amazing. And would you say there was kind of just like a natural progression? So you started kind of the agency model where you're connecting people to, well, connecting e-com businesses to the payment processes. And then did the opportunity again present itself where it's like, oh no, wait, we can just build this ourselves, and it just naturally progressed from there? Or did you always intend to build and scale a company and exit it?
No, that was never the intention. It was very much like a segmented growth. It was extremely organic. The business first came about when we probably would have been, when I was first approached by someone to help them get to the banks, etc. It didn't even think of it as a business, to be honest with you. It was like, look, I'll just make the connection. And then we had the idea that, okay, why don't we charge some money for doing these connections and potentially give them more of a helping hand, like put their information into a CRM, help them get their information to the banks and how to present it appropriately and so on. And again, it was never really a business idea, and it very much started as an agency. And what we would do at the time is we'd have developers build out payment pages for the consumers that came into the agencies manually. And we realized it was a very inefficient model, and it was taking too much time. So we had the idea to use the income that the agency was generating to start building out the software. And ultimately, the software is where all the value came from, because when we came to exit the business, it was now a software company generating like 7 figures plus in EBITDA every year. So yeah, it was very extremely natural progression month by month, but it did happen all quite quickly.
And would you attribute a lot of that growth to just rolling the profits back into the business? Did you take a cut at all, or was it all just profits right back into the business?
Yeah, I guess what was phenomenal about this business is, in theory, we started it with $0. It was connections. Now, in hindsight, it was a lot more than that. It was millions of dollars of revenue, prior years, and experience, etc., that could have never happened without all that income and money. But the business itself was started with nothing. There was no capital input into the business. It was essentially connections, manual work. We got paid from clients up front, etc. And every single penny we generated in profit, we would have recycled back into the business towards development of the software itself.
This is extremely impressive, particularly for someone like your age. And I'd like to just give listeners a bit more context on like why or how you made the decision to become an entrepreneur. How did you come to that conclusion or decision?
Yeah, I guess it's quite unique. And I'd attribute it back to one specific day. I was probably 16, 17 years old. I woke up one morning and I said, I think I just read The Secret, which is the law of attraction book that a lot of people will be familiar with. And I realized that I definitely wanted to be a millionaire. And the goal was to be a millionaire by the age of 25. So that was like my long-term goal. And I'd got a notebook out and I started writing down some numbers as to what I wanted at a specific time, a specific age, etc. Be it physique, financial situations, etc. And that was essentially what got me started. Ever since that exact day, I've been a completely different person from prior to that age, because I was trying to enjoy life, have fun, spend time with friends. But after that moment, everything was like business focused, into YouTube, hustling with every possible thing I could. My first gig was calling plumbers around the country, seeing if I could do a Google My Business listing for them, etc. But the decision ultimately came from, I knew I wasn't going to be a professional footballer. I know I wasn't going to be very good in school. I wasn't going to be a doctor. I didn't have the intelligence for that. So I could clearly see that business was my only route. And probably a lot of it came from my father too, because my father was a businessman all his life, and I was seeing that growing up, and I was like, okay, I kind of understand how this works, so I'll give it a shot.
That's so interesting, because a lot of people want to become businessmen or like the idea of it, but don't make a definitive decision at such a young age to just, okay, screw it, I'm going to focus all my attention on that. It takes a lot of discipline and maturity for someone at that age.
It definitely requires a lot of discipline. It's probably the most critical part. Consistency and discipline. Whatever about discipline, because you can be disciplined for a couple of days in a row, but if you can just keep that consistent over a long period of time, it's almost impossible not to get some results over the course of time. Like, it's very difficult not to.
Yeah, true. And so I'd like to touch on the Google My Business a bit more. How did you decide to start that business, and like how much were you making from your first business?
Good question. I reversed back from the e-commerce. The first thing before e-commerce was Google My Business calls. So what I would do is I found a YouTuber, of course, again, and YouTubers are underrated for business advice. Some of them have excellent ideas as to how to get started, be it agencies or whatever the case may be. This guy that I was watching was saying, all you need to do is call local service providers in your area or jurisdiction or country or whatever the case may be, and get them a Google My Business profile. So what I did is I honed in on plumbers specifically. So a plumber in an area might have a great business, infrastructure, employees, but he might struggle with leads for whatever reason. So what I did was I'd call the plumbers and say, look, you can give me $500. I'll put you on Google. When someone searches for plumber in this region, what will happen is your listing will pop up first. So if you Googled plumber London or a specific region in London, for example, their listing will pop up first if you did the correct backlinks, etc. All I did was I went to Fiverr.com. I spent maybe 30 minutes putting their Google My Business listing together and their phone number on it. And then I got a backlink provider on Fiverr.com, literally paid $5. And what they would do is they'd list the backlinks everywhere on all the yellow pages type websites, etc. And over the course of a couple of weeks, because somebody, especially me in Ireland, there was no one doing this. So I was able to get a lot of the plumbers up to the top of the Google My Business listing. And it transformed a lot of their businesses, because now anytime someone in that region was Googling plumber Limerick, plumber specific region in London, did pop up number 1 or 2, and their business changed. So that was the first business. It didn't generate a lot of money because the amount of rejection you get specifically from tradesmen is quite aggressive, because you know the type tradesmen are, that they're not very open to conversations about like technology, because they're so old school essentially. So it was a tough business, a lot of rejection, but it taught me a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure. Like, did you have a set amount of calls you wanted to make like each day, or like how often were you rejected and things like that? Do you remember?
Rejected constantly. It could have been, maybe I had a 1% hit rate, maybe less. So maybe a 0.5% hit rate. So every 200 calls, I might get one, maybe.
Shit.
Yeah.
And that's what it takes. Like, you learn so much from that process, and a lot of people aren't even willing to like pick up the phone and just
literally
get
anyone
rejected.
could start that exact business today. You could sit down on your computer and you could start making phone calls, put a specific sales pitch together. Ideally, you take a sales course first, any sales course off the internet, and sales is essentially how to get a customer from A to B, and you're going to be that gap for them. And then start picking up the phone and making phone calls.
And although you said like you didn't make a shit ton of money from it, how did it feel like getting paid for the first time in your first business?
It felt incredible. I got a check from a plumber called Stephen O'Sullivan, and he sent me a check in the post down to my house, just on faith that I was a good guy. Because again, I didn't have a credit card terminal. I couldn't accept the credit card transaction. I didn't have PayPal. I didn't even know what cards or PayPal, how they functioned or worked at the time. So he just sent me a check down in the post. I went to the bank and I checked it, and there was the cash. So that was the very first check I got from a plumber in Tipperary. And if you Google plumber Tipperary to this day, he'll be right up there at the top, and you can see my little reviews under his list. And Jack Cregan 5 stars. I did my sister's profile, my mom's profile, etc. So yeah.
No, that's really cool. And so you mentioned it wasn't like an amazing business,
No.
but it was your first. So how did you move on to the next opportunity, and how did you decide to pursue that next opportunity?
So the next opportunity while I was doing that would have been, I had some kind of concept of e-commerce, because naturally I was in my YouTube feed now was being tailored towards business and making money online. And I would have started to see a lot of the e-commerce and dropshipping and Shopify videos. Gabriel Singerman at the time was a big one, and Jordan Welch. You'll see tons of these big guys right now. And what would have happened was the Irish government changed the rules around alcohol, where instead of having like 1 pint of beer, you can now only have half a pint of beer while driving. So your blood alcohol content, the limit was reduced. And I was at my auntie's house, and unfortunately everyone in Ireland likes too much alcohol, I guess, everywhere now. And they were all complaining about this issue. And they were all rushing the next day when the law came out to get a breathalyzer in the shops, and Halfords, B&Q, etc. But they were sold out everywhere because everyone wanted them. So like I was just sitting, and the idea just popped straight into my head. And not joking, I left the house, ran down to my house and went into the computer. I remember to this day. And I downloaded the Jumpstart team onto the Shopify store, popped in my email, made a business manager on my Facebook profile, and I got a picture of a policeman. And the policeman was pulling someone over and putting a breathalyzer into the car. And all I did was went on to Canva and said, "Don't let this be you." Just the caption. And I popped it out as a Facebook ad. I linked it to the Shopify store. No joking, this took all maximum 60 minutes. And I found a supplier on eBay in the UK that was doing these in breathalyzers, the exact ones. I just copied the picture and put it on for 40 euros. I was sourcing it for 12. And sales, like within the hour, started coming in. So I think that business did maybe $100,000 or euros in sales over the 3-4 week period. But then unfortunately, like I had exhausted the market. Everyone had their breathalyzers, so they were happy. That was a brilliant experience. It was just identifying the opportunity, the perfect timing, and taking action almost immediately. And luckily for me, the infrastructure was there. I had the Shopify's, I had the Canvas, I had eBay, I had infrastructure to get products to the consumers, etc. And again, it didn't even take any capital. That was a zero capital business, bar a couple of $100 to start the ads, and then the money would have flowed in organically from Stripe and PayPal, etc. It did have mishaps, of course. There was issues with PayPal holds and so on, but they were all resolved.
That's crazy. And how did it feel taking that like next step? So you've gone from like making a couple $100 from the Google My Business to hundreds of thousands of bucks like in 4 weeks. Like that's pretty crazy leap.
Yeah, it was, I guess it all happened so quickly and you're so caught up in the chaos of it all. You have to learn about accountancy, you have to learn about VAT, you have to learn about product fulfillment, you have to learn everything humanly possible. You get an MBA essentially in 4 weeks when this type of thing happens, because you have no choice but to fulfill on your obligations to your consumers and so on. So it was surreal, and the money part didn't really come into the equation ever, because yes, it was very profitable, and now I was like a very young guy making loads of money, but that never really crossed my head, and it never really bothered me. It was more about the pursuit of the business, the knowledge that I was gaining from it, etc. Because from a young age, my ambitions were much higher than just a small amount of capital just to keep me ticking over. They were just like, my play has always been a very long-term one, not short-term. So the money never really came into the equation or impacted me. It was just something I knew would come if I kept working.
Have the secret and the law of attraction.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I hate to say it because I know it's a cringy type thing, and not everyone will agree with this type of equation. But it's almost like a form of self-belief, and if you keep propelling yourselves towards these goals, they should happen generally.
Yeah. Well, it's just very similar to the book Think and Grow Rich. It's like the same concept.
Yeah.
If you're, and the secret and all of this like manifestation, it sounds all woo-woo, but if you're spending a lot of energy and like mind share on focusing on one particular thing again and again, you're going to take steps in that particular direction. Like it's not just going to fall out of the sky, but because you're focusing on it, you're going to make things happen. So yeah, I really believe in it too. It is a pity that it has kind of like a woo-woo kind of.
There's a good book. There's a book called Psycho-Cybernetics, I think it's called. I'm not sure if you've read it, but for anyone, I think it's woo. It's a difficult read, but it will give you a more scientific explanation of like energy waves, etc., and that kind of helps people get over the woo side of the law of attraction and more into the physics and science of it, because it goes into quantum physics, because essentially like it links back to quantum physics in a way, which is interesting.
That is really interesting. I need to add that to my list. And so after the breathalyzers, you stayed in e-com for a bit. What other products did you sell in e-com?
After that, I had the bug. Like I now knew the potential of putting the right product on Facebook in front of a consumer and what could happen if you got that equation right. Because it's essentially just like an equation. You have a product, you have an advertisement, and you have a consumer looking at that advertisement. And if you can get that max or the mix right, where you can keep your cost per acquisition per consumer low enough where you make a margin on your product, it's like a money printer. Not to say it like that, but it's like you can really build a really cool business based on specific products. So all I did after that was I used the capital that I generated to test. And there was a range of things that worked, like anything from kitchen utensils to furniture for your house to at one point we were selling taps. We did a custom print on demand business where we turn consumers into cartoon characters, and we had a whole team of artists on the back end. And around that time, I started seeing people selling like these wireless earbuds, and that was probably my next big success. I started selling them across the UK, these wireless earbuds. I created a brand around it, etc. Same business model, found a third party supplier and would ship them from their locations. And that business, I probably did, again, maybe $500,000 in revenue, maybe around $1 million in revenue, and extremely profitable. But unfortunately, like, it just died. Like, I couldn't get the products to work anymore. So what I did was I took a bit of a gamble, and I pre-purchased stock, fully customized, fully branded up, etc. And what I did at the time was I just said I'd relaunch, do Facebook ads, custom branded packaging. I created all my own ads, just my hands with the unpackaging the boxes, really good, really clean content. Got a couple of videographers on board, etc. And I launched the ads, and unfortunately, it just didn't work. Like, they weren't working. And now I had 20,000 units of stock in the warehouse, and nothing was working. And I was panicking because like, I would have lost a fortune. And I seen a couple of influencers in the US like posting videos of similar types of earphones or whatever. And I was like, okay, let me try this, but I don't want to try it in the US. I want to try it around Europe because everyone's doing it in the US. So I tried all the European countries, and I sent an email to one YouTuber in Italy, Jack Cregan, and I said, what would it cost to do a comparison to the AirPods of my earphones, full video, etc., etc. And he said 5,000 euros, and I was like, it's a lot, but I'll try it. Let's go for it. I'll try that. And he puts the video out, and I think within the first 48 hours, we've done like probably $500,000 in sales. In like, it was incredible. It was surreal. Like, this portion is hard to describe. It's like you're seeing these numbers on your screen or on your Shopify dashboard, and you just cannot believe it. Gave him one pair of earphones. He did a whole video on them. The video got like 800,000 views or something. And he was just happened to be a very credible person in Italy. So people that watch him, his viewers, are clearly very loyal because whatever he recommends, they tend to like have a preference for potentially go and purchase. So he just had a link under the video, and he did a comparison, and he liked the product itself, which is obviously a big help. And that video, it probably generated, I don't know, like millions and millions of dollars in sales in that specific product. Obviously extremely profitable because we didn't really have to do ads. Like, the one video was pretty much our ad spend. Obviously we do retargeting on Facebook, and you need to learn that. And then I learned Snapchat ads, and I learned how to do Google ads, and I got an agency on board to help support the ads. And then I got an accountancy team on board because the revenue was so high. And then we had, like, there was obviously cash flow issues because you had to prepay suppliers and all these issues. But that was, again, another massive learning experience, like with like millions of dollars in revenue, and just like, again, a surreal process. And I think this is only at the age of 19 all this was happening. Like, I was extremely young, and I was going into accountancy meetings, and they're kind of looking at me like, you're like, are you sure you should be here, type thing. But again, learned a phenomenal amount through that business. But again, naturally, that it's kind of like a fad and a phase, and that kind of died down, and most people had their products. So but again, brilliant experience. And that's where ultimately I learned all the information I needed with the payment processor issues, etc., to go ahead and launch the following business and the subsequent business, which was the agency turned software.
Yeah, that's a really cool story. And did that kind of change your perception of like partnering with creators and finding the right creators to market your products? And like, one good creator who's trustworthy in whatever industry is way more worth it than like a scattered approach of just looking for any creator?
Yeah, if you can, for me, I got a good feel for creators when that business happened, because we didn't just use one, we used multiple across like France, the US, Italy, because we launched it to other markets with the products as well. And you can kind of tell, like, if you do enough, if you kind of, you need to go with your intuition a little bit too, because sometimes like you get metrics from the agents, because ultimately when you're trying to work with an influencer or a celebrity, you'll be dealing with an agent, and the agent will share their costs, they'll share their engagement. So how many Instagram story views did they get, how many likes did they get in their stories, etc., etc. And it's really hard to tell, like, if they're audience is authentic. It's extremely difficult to tell. So like reverse engineering what their likes look like, what's their like to view ratio, what's the engagement like in their comment section, etc. All of them things would have to happen. But again, sometimes it was hit and miss, and I've definitely lost money on working with some of these influencers. The thing about it though, you also, if you can license it correctly with them, you can use their content in your advertisements, etc., which can be very powerful, because now you have like potentially like a celebrity endorsement or a micro influencer endorsement, and it makes it a lot easier because now you have this automated content stream as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you touched on it a bit, but what is e-com and like dropshipping kind of like? It like ebbs and flows, like you said. So you sort of exhaust a channel or the type of product, everyone has it, the fad dies out, and you sort of move on to the next one. Because from the outside looking in, dropshipping seems a bit like that, where everyone's trying to find the next hit. When that hit happens, lots of people start selling that product, and then they exhaust that market, and then they move on to the next.
Yeah, I think people also give up too soon on specific products, because you can look at some certain brands, like you could look at the Gymsharks of the world, for example, which was almost like you could kind of compare it to a drop ship type brand at the start. It was a very small brand, and it was essentially selling clothes. And you could have said, I'm sure this happened to them at one point at the start, where Stringer Vest might have not sold well anymore. But as you start to build up a brand, and you can adapt, and you can change product lines, and you can bring in new products, you can do an updated version. And we did all them things with these earphones as well. It lasted for 2 years, whereas originally it died out. The first run ahead of it died out after a couple of months. But we recreated ourselves, we rebranded, we did everything we possibly could to keep the sales and engagement high. So if you do commit to something, and if you have a good product line and a good product category and niche, you can build something special out of it, because there's countless examples of that. Like Blendjet is another one where like their web traffic is still insane, and that essentially started as a basic dropship product, but they've done insane creatives, influencers, new versions of the products, and so on. Icon Amsterdam is another example, which was essentially a dropshipping brand started from the guys out of Amsterdam. There's countless examples. But I think what ends up happening is you can lose confidence in yourself, you can lose confidence in the business if these dips in sales do happen on specific product lines, etc. And you don't have the commitment to say, okay, I'm going to commit to this as a brand specifically and grow it, improve everything. So it's products definitely die, but I think if you're in the right industry with the right product categories, you can make it work for a sustained period of time.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you mentioned this all happened like when you were 19 and then moved on to the agency, but I know you also tried your hand at going to university.
Yes.
Where did that fit in the timeline?
Well, it was somewhere probably around the initial e-commerce business. And I tried my hand at university for about a year. It was my dream to go there. Again, it was probably part of my manifestation. I wanted to do international business, and I worked like extremely hard in school, and luckily I got it. But ultimately, when I got there, I just found that the business knowledge, because I was co-learning, I was doing my YouTube learning, I was doing like actual practical learning in a university, and the university was just so uncorrelated from what I was learning online, and I couldn't bring myself to do 4 years of university knowing that like the world is moving so quickly in a digital direction, and the universities were so caught up in like predated education around business. So ultimately that was my decision to leave, and luckily my parents were on board and they were happy for me to, I did it defer, so I deferred a year, but ultimately I never went back.
I was going to ask like how your parents felt about that. Did you sort of like prove to them that going the other route was worth it and you're making enough money that it wouldn't be a problem, that you didn't need a degree?
Yeah, I guess, but at the time it was uncertain, like, because what is enough money? Like maybe I had $30,000 or something at the time, and it was like it's okay, it's good, but like it's not enough to quantify you dropping out of university. But my parents are very unique in the sense that like they really don't care. For example, like my brother left in, I don't know what year, in Ireland it was fifth year, so he left when he was quite young, I think 16 or 17. He left school to become a tradesman, and they were totally okay with that, just because that's what he was passionate about. I left university to pursue businesses because that's what I was passionate about, and they were totally on board with everything. So I was extremely fortunate with my parents.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so would you say, is your situation unique, or do you think for the average person, like going to uni is still worth it?
Yeah, it's a very difficult question for me to answer, obviously, because everybody is so different.
Yeah.
If you're focus is business specifically, I don't think college is ever going to be to your disadvantage, because there's a couple of routes you can go to business. You can go young, hustle, try do startups, or you can go climb the corporate ladder, get some insight into some big company, and then find a niche or a business idea within that, and then branch off to build your own company while having built up a bunch of capital from employment through that company or whatever, whoever you work with. There's so many avenues. Like, I couldn't possibly give the correct one. Like this one, because I was like a hustler, I was like kind of street smart, I was able to go, but not everyone has that muscle to flex in business. And they're too afraid of the obstacles that come about, like, and they'll hit brick walls because of that. Whereas generally speaking, I'm quite loose when it comes to business. I'll never see anything as a wall. I'll always bash right through it, just because my brain just works that way. I'm very fortunate that my brain works to find solutions to every single problem that will arise ever in business, typically speaking. But not everyone has that muscle to flex. And sometimes it's something that you need to train and work, and it might take longer for other. It's just, luckily, that was a skill set that I had. So it's a very difficult question. But if you feel you're a person that is super ambitious, you have that intelligence and street smart type personality to go out and start building business, and you're not afraid to do that, picking up the phone and calling the plumbers in your area, then I think potentially you should try that gig and coordinate it with university or school at the same time. And if you can get some traction and you believe in yourself, maybe veer to the direction of leaving.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'd like to touch a bit on like friendships and how your friendships have developed as your career has progressed. Have you like kept the same friends from high school, or have your friends changed?
Yeah, no, definitely kept the same friends. My friends, I'm very clear. Everybody's very clear with the type of person I am, that they understand, like, I'm completely focused around business and work. And it's almost always been like that with my friend group since I was 16, 17, probably. It never impacted. They just know me as the business guy that works hard and he tries to make a lot of money. And it's as simple as that. Never impacted any of my relationships. Still have all my same friends. Maybe I might socialize with them or do the same things all the time, but definitely keep touch with all of them. I think that's important.
Yeah, I think it is important. But I'm sure there's been instances where you've had your head down and had to like focus on the business, and that's been a priority. And would you say that hasn't affected your friendships because you're very conscious of it, and so you've been able to, like, when you come out of that other side, or you communicate that you're in a time of like head down, and they understand that? Is that the case?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, because sometimes you do, especially me, like, I probably missed like 2 or 3 years of life. Like, especially when you drop out of university, you miss the university lifestyle. You don't have the nights out and the parties and all that fun. So I did definitely miss that. And I guess there was probably a void in me that, like, was feeling that missing. But I knew it was for the greater good, especially now, because I could really race ahead and get an edge while I was on the younger side. So it didn't impact me too much. And, life moves on. Friends are busy. They have other friends. Like, people don't really worry too much. And then you can pop your head back out of the sea or the ocean whenever you're ready, and everyone will accept you back in. So
Yeah.
definitely impacted relationships with family, skipping dinners, working late nights. If you're in a relationship, it can be detrimental, honestly. So you really need to maintain that one. Be clear with your partner about specific hours. When are you going to come out of the office at night? When do you have meetings? When do you need to travel? And I think ultimately, like, if you can be transparent around your hours and time, and that's one thing I was weak at. I was never like very clear with, like, I'm going to be done at 11:30, or I'm going to be done at 12, or I'm going to be done at 10. And just give people an expectation of when they can see you or when they can spend time with you. I think that's important and something I probably need to work on.
Yeah, that's great advice. And would you consider like entrepreneurship a lonely journey?
It's a good question. I think it's almost like going to the gym, probably. When you go to the gym and you don't really have that physique yet, and you're lifting weights, but you don't really have any results whatsoever. You don't have your six pack yet, or you don't have your bulging biceps. And it's kind of like a process when you're on your own and you're kind of figuring it out. But then once you start to see the results, it all comes together. Business is kind of similar. Like, when I first started, it was extremely lonely because I didn't have anyone to talk to with business about. I didn't have business partners. I was doing everything on my own, trying to figure it out. And it was a lonely process, because you're essentially like, you're in a rainforest and you're completely lost. But once you get out of that and you start to form intelligence in a specific industry and you start to build a business in a specific industry, I can't even describe the network that comes with that, the business friends you make and the businesses you work with and your customers and your clients, provided you're a decent business person and you run a good business. I've built some phenomenal friendships for life. And ultimately, I think in business, you have to be friends with the people you do business with, because you end up spending more time with them than you do with your family and your friends, way more time. So if you can't be friends with them, I can't even imagine doing business. I'd have to get out, because they have to be your best friends. And I think people pick it up wrong. It's like, oh no, he's just my business partner, strictly business. It's like, no, we're family here. We're literally family. We have to be family. So that's one thing I've learned over the past couple of years, especially with the Rebills business, where there was three of us, essentially 3 or 4 of us. And we were like a little family. We'd do trips away and it was great. I'm still best friends with them to this day.
Yeah, that is great. And I think it's something everyone should consider, because like you just said, when you're getting into business, it's not just business. You're spending so much time with these people. You've got to like them. You've got to respect them. You've got to trust them. It can't just be strictly business. And so you got to consider carefully who you're getting into business with. It's a big decision.
So carefully.
Yeah.
It's probably the most important decision you'll make. Especially if you're going into something that requires capital and you're raising investment and it's a really long-term play. Try your best to get an understanding of that person that you're with. And if you see any things that are potentially controversial at the start, address them and either dissolve the partnership or fix the issues and move forward.
Everyone kind of has different milestones or goals that they're working towards. And you mentioned after reading The Secret that you set at 25 years old, which you're 25 years old now, you had some goals. I'm curious, what were those goals and have you achieved them? And now have you set ones further in the future?
Yeah, to keep it really simple, like when I wrote in that diary, my goal was a 6-pack, and my goal was, and I literally drew a picture of myself with a 6-pack, and my goal would have been have $1 million by 25, like, which is like the American dream almost. Yeah, luckily I have achieved both of them dreams. The 6-pack is quite hard because you have to train consistently, especially when you're in business. Like trying to get time for the gym and take all your meetings and do all your work can be tricky, but it's super important as well. But yeah, what I used to do is I used to have this walk I used to do at home down to the forest. I used to look in the forest and I used to just like talk the manifestation out of like, I want this much money in my bank account. I want X. I want happiness, health, wealth for all my family, friends, etc. And when we sold the business, that number that I would like project out was the number in my bank account with Bank of Ireland. When we sold the business. So it was quite an unusual, surreal feeling for that to happen. And when that happened, it was actually a bit of a process, and like, because you need to reset your goals, and you're after achieving this massive milestone that you planned for and you dreamt about. And then you have to do a whole reassessment. You're like, okay, like what do I actually need and want now? And it was actually a frustrating process for me. And it was like, and I almost had this disbelief, like, okay, I'm stumbling now. I don't know what I need to do. I need to be clear about my visions into the future because this all happened so quick. But yeah, new milestones have been set for into the future. So that's what we're working towards now.
Are you open to telling us what those new milestones are?
They're essentially like monetary milestones. And around specifically more now as I'm coming on, I'm 25 now. So I have family goals. I have the pursuit of children and like just building a beautiful, happy family, and ultimately businesses, because business is my complete passion. So it's employment for people, building products that will benefit society in some way, shape, or form. And that's what we're trying to do now. And then family goals and moral goals as well. Just making sure like you're a good person in general, and then fitness goals, making sure I'm staying as young, healthy, and fit as I possibly can at all times. So essentially, yeah, it's like a full circle goal more than a very specific monetary goal right now.
Yeah, that makes sense. And are you conscious of like, the shifting goalposts problem at all? Like a lot of people speak about like once you hit the milestone, you move the goalpost further, and that keeps going on and on and on. And I know that's really important for like drive, and that's what successful people have. But like, is there a point where you stop and enough is enough, or is it always just you need more, need to grow, need to improve yourself?
Yeah, I think happiness doesn't necessarily come from that end milestone. I don't think it ever does. Happiness for me is especially, and I think most people will come from like progression, just like everyday progression. Like you're waking up, you're doing a good job, you're being good to your family, you've done a great day's work, etc. And that's where happiness comes from for me. Because I think most people will know, like, you go to the gym and you have a great workout. That's where the happiness comes from. It's not necessarily like the great result you'll have. That'll make you momentarily happy, but ultimately it's the pursuit, knowing you're doing a good job every single day. That's my goalpost, generally speaking. But it's obviously aiming for a specific goalpost. But that's not the important one. I think the important one is the day to day, making sure you're waking up, you're doing your work, you're making progress, and that's where the happiness comes from for me.
Yeah, I like that view. So now I'd like to talk a bit about the winging it part of entrepreneurship. And you touched on it when, like, the breathalyzers, over those 4 weeks, you were selling a shit ton and you just had to learn everything: payments, contracts, legal stuff, accounting. And you ended up just like figuring it all out. And was that what it was? Was it just figuring it out because you just had to? Or did you rely on others to help you figure it out? Did you hire some people? What was your process in just like learning business?
Honestly, I'm very, very like, I will do everything I possibly can to learn. I'll scatter the internet. But I guess ultimately there's only so much you can do, right? You have to rely on other people for specific things. And if it comes to, there's two sides of it. Like, if I need to learn accountancy, I go on Google and I search for accountants, and ultimately, like, there's accountants there for a reason. They'll help you with your accounts. They'll give you guidance. They'll give you tax advice, and they do all them things very well. They'll prepare your bookwork. They'll file it with the revenue, etc. And what ends up happening sometimes as a businessman or woman, you don't need to know that much. Like, you need to know the right people to do specific things, and you need to have an understanding of it. But you don't need to. This is what cripples a lot of people. You don't need to understand how to file your taxes or what the intricacies of VAT or whatever the case may be, because there's people there to handle that for you, especially when you're running a business. You need to have a broad understanding of your liabilities and your costs, etc. But you don't need to know the ins and outs of it. So you can just leave that. You can let that slide out of your head and into someone else's head, and that's important. And that's what I was very good at from when we first started. Like, passing on responsibility to people and stakeholders that were responsible for that specific area of the business. So that's important too. When it comes to consumers, and you're talking to consumers about a specific product, especially when we had the agency and the software, sometimes it's just knowing 10% more than the person you're speaking to knows. Literally. If you could just be a page ahead of them, and that's how it was for me for the longest time. I was just a page ahead, one page ahead, that was it. And I just knew a little bit more than they knew. And once you know a little bit more, because they're talking to you as a consumer, they're putting their faith and trust in you. So generally speaking, you'll never have an issue once you're just one page ahead of your consumer or whoever you're talking to. Be at a bank you're trying to onboard, and they're talking to you about your business. And yes, you're putting wings on it and you're making it sound very sexy, but in reality, it's like it's right at the start. And this is what I do all the time. I make myself sound like I'm a big organization and we've capital behind us, but in the reality is that's not the case. So yeah, sometimes you have to wing it. There's no other choice.
Yeah, I think that concept applies to not only business, but like, because I work in content and it's very similar. A lot of people feel like, I'm not an expert in a particular field yet, so why would anyone listen to me? But being 1 or 2 years ahead and then sharing what you've learned, you actually connect a lot better with your audience, speaking to the people that were you a year ago, because you can relate to them more and you can create content around that actually resonates. Whereas if you're so far ahead and an expert, you've forgotten all those little intricacies, those little mistakes you made. And so, yeah, I think, very similar to what you said with business.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
And so you touched on at the beginning of our conversation that you're working on a project called Reward Point. And what is the other project that you're working on?
Yeah, it's very simple. So I came across a business probably just a couple of months before we sold a previous business. And once we sold it, I said, okay, I'll work on this passively. I'll take a little bit of time off, and then I got to work on this rewards business. And essentially what it is when we're in payments, so we're in credit card payments. So credit card payments it's quite complex. From a consumer standpoint, it's really simple, right? You go and you pay with your card and you tap your card, and it all works like fairy dust and magic. But the back end behind that is hyper complex. There's acquiring banks, there's issuing banks, there's MasterCard, there's Visa, there's rules, there's downtime, there's uptime, there's so many things going on. So I ended up hating credit cards because it was just so complicated. And in 2013, a company called Plaid came out. And Plaid is essentially like a lot of people in the US and now in the UK as well, because there's a couple of companies like it in the UK. They're products that link your financial institution to like fintech apps. So if you want to use a budget management app on your iPhone, you can download the app and you can actually link your institution. Let's say in the UK, you can link your Barclays account or your Sterling account, or if you're in the US, you can link your Chase account or Wells Fargo, whatever the case may be. And now these APIs, and these were like legislation that came out in the EU. So the banks were forced to open up their APIs to allow fintech apps to build products on top of them. So we aren't so reliant on the banks giving us information all the time and waiting for them to do product updates and so on. So it was essentially legislation that forced this to happen. So Plaid came out and they had an API connection into all the banks in the US. So now apps like Mint and Rocket Money, for example, you could download on your phone, link your bank account or your 6 bank accounts all into one finance app on your phone that had a really nice dashboard. It displayed your transactions nicer. You could show you your monthly spend, what subscriptions you're signed up to, etc., all without you having to log into your 6 banks. So this is a brilliant product for people over the past 3-4 years in the US. And ultimately, Rocket Money was one of the biggest, and they ended up selling for 1.25 billion, I think, to the Rocket Mortgage Group. When I seen that technology, I was completely fascinated. And there's a big company in the UK that do cashback for consumers. So what they do is you make a purchase on a specific website and they'll show you a pop-up after you make your purchase offering you cashback on the order that you just placed. So let's say Domino's Pizza, for example, or Trainline. And the way they did it was via card. So you put in your credit card information and they put the cashback back onto your card. And it was like a subscription service. You pay like $9.99 or whatever a month. I just seen it as a great business and the revenue was brilliant, but the way they were doing it was very inefficient. So all reward point is it's that same concept, but we link the consumer's cashback via an open banking connection. So they come through to get their cashback, they make an open banking connection via Plaid, let's say, and then we feed all their data into a portal and a dashboard for them. And what happens is we can tie their spending habits back to cashback offers that are relevant to them. So for example, they spend $120 on McDonald's every month. Okay, that's a bit of an exaggeration. I don't think anybody does that. Maybe let's say $12 on McDonald's.
You'd be surprised.
We've APIs into all the cashback, gift card providers, etc., to see how that could have been more efficient for them. How could they have made the McDonald's purchase in a more efficient manner? And then essentially when they log into the app or their portal, they'll see at the top, next time you purchase at McDonald's, use this coupon code, use this gift card, use this avenue, use this avenue. And it's correlated directly back to their spending. So versus like the traditional rewards company that's showing you a bunch of standardized rewards, these are essentially customized back to your spending habits because we can see your spending habits because we're API'd into your bank. Every time you make a transaction, that helps build your model and your little financial assistant inside Reward Point. And that's pretty much it. And how the business generates revenue is there'll be a small monthly subscription of $9.99 or something. And anytime you benefit from a cashback offer, we get a tiny percentage of it as a business for sending that revenue towards that business. That's essentially what Reward Point is. So it's essentially like it's a data business because it pulls in like tons of data. We did a very soft launch. We signed up 1,000 users. I think we've $50 million of transactional data under assessment at the moment. It's insane. The technology is incredible. But again, I was only able to generate a business idea like this from years of experience in payments and seeing the intricacies, and then knowing that I can wing businesses like I've winged them in the past. Because again, this is another business ultimately that I'm just winging right now until I learn more and more and more about the infrastructure and building a backend portal and building an iOS application and so on, because these are things I haven't done before. So, yeah.
I think another point or story that we've spoken about outside of this conversation is just to emphasize the importance of like relationships and how far you've gone on your journey. Could you explain how you got those 1,000 users? Because a lot of people are struggling to get 1,000 users to use their product. How did you get those first 1,000 users to test the product?
Good question. So essentially, I was in a fortunate position because I know I've now a large network of big e-commerce owners, etc. So I was able to go to one of my friends that was a large e-commerce owner and asked him kindly, would he allow me to have my pop-ups on the end of his payment pages after his consumers had made their purchase. And luckily he obliged. And that was as simple as that. So I leveraged the relationship to get our MVP launched. So our MVP launch pretty much cost us nothing, bar development costs. That's how I was able to get MVP launched with 1,000 users. So a bit of a competitive edge because of the years of experience I've had and the connections that I've made.
Yeah. I think that's important to note, that like it sort of experience builds upon itself and creates more and more opportunities and creates like an exponential flywheel, that you've got to dive in and start, and it's going to be grungy at the beginning, but it almost, maybe easy is the wrong word, but it almost becomes easier in a sense because you have those connections to draw on and stuff. But you've got to get started somewhere. And if you don't start because you think, oh, I'll never get those 1,000 users, or then like you never will. So you've got to start somewhere and get the ball rolling.
Yeah, exactly.
And what excites you about this project?
I guess just because we're using, in business, things are constantly changing and there's new technology and you have to be on the forefront of things, typically speaking. Like if you look at all the big companies now, you log into the websites or whatever and you're seeing AI products popping out everywhere because these businesses have no choice but to adapt with new technology. So what excites me about this specific project that we're working on is it encompasses all the new technology that's out there. So the most up-to-date financial technology, which is open banking now, AI, because we use AI to assess transactional history and give the consumer updates, and teach the model about their spending habits and so on. So that's probably the most exciting part, is that I've been able to come up with a business concept that can utilize two brand new technologies that are going to pioneer how the future of business works: AI, open banking, etc. And that's probably what's most exciting to me, because even if the business ends up not being as profitable or whatever the case may be in the future, I know I have these technology stacks learned and I have an understanding of them. So that's probably the most exciting part for me, is that we're using such unique technology in a business today.
And is the goal, because you're using all this new tech and it is attractive to like some really big businesses and it could be an additional service offering for them, is the intention to possibly be acquired like sooner rather than later, or is it to grow this out into like a really big company?
It's an interesting question, and I actually only sat down to write a venture check for a guy the same age as me. I met him. He's building a similar type product in Saudi Arabia, and I met him in Dubai only probably 2 months ago, and we sat down, and I had like what seemed like if someone had sat down with Jeff Bezos, um, however many 30, 40 years ago. And that's what it felt like when I was sitting with this kid. I was sitting down with him and we're having this conversation. I asked him the exact question you just asked me: what is the goal with this specific project, etc. And the answer he gave me was so phenomenal. It was like, this is exit. Like, what are you talking about, exit? This is my legacy. I'm going to build this. This is going to be there for 100, 200 years. Like, this is what we're going to do. This is the exact roadmap. We're going to first integrate with all these grocers. Like, it was a kind of open banking type project as well. And I just couldn't believe his answer, that someone would be so dedicated to the cause for this many, like for 100 years. Like he had a 100-year plan in place, for the succession plan, etc. And I was sitting in awe. Like I was like, wow, that is absolutely phenomenal. And it made me rethink my goals and the way I go about business. So essentially, yeah, like every business I'm building now is more of it's a longer term play versus like trying to go and get a quick exit, because we've had that experience, luckily and fortunately, and we've built up a decent chunk of capital to support us into all our future business ventures for a sustained period of time. So anything nowadays that we're working on it's more long term for sure. But I think everyone has the goal of being acquired, because it's a life changing outcome, generally
Yeah.
speaking.
Yeah. We've been speaking about one project, but you said you're working on two at the moment. What is the second one that you're
The
working
second
on?
one's quite unique, right? So there's when we were building the previous company, we used a technology called FlexCharge. And FlexCharge was essentially, how it works is, imagine you're on a website and let's say you're buying a pair of dunks on Nike's website, and you put in your debit or credit card and your credit card fails. For whatever reason, you've insufficient funds, the bank think it's fraud, whatever the case may be. This exact process happened to a guy from Israel called Ziv. Ziv was in the US using Uber and his card wouldn't work. And he got extremely frustrated by the process. And he came up with this idea that if there could be an invoice factoring or credit type business that would see that transaction failing in real time and take it and try and salvage it with a different bank or a range of different banks. That's essentially what the technology FlexCharge does. You plug it into your e-commerce business or your online business where you accept credit cards. Anytime a consumer's credit card fails for whatever reason, this technology via API will take the card pan and factor that transaction. So it would save your transaction, Byron, on Nike's website, and now your sale will go through successfully. Everything looks normal to you, and FlexCharge have salvaged it with a different bank, or they essentially have intelligence and AI that will get all the details from your transaction. Why might that have failed with that specific bank? Why did Stripe reject that transaction? And then send it to Chase's payment processing division, and then they can successfully process it because they bundle it up better for the banks. The bank can understand that transaction better, and they say, "Oh, like it's this IP, it's from this consumer. This is his history. This is his credit score. We know this is a good consumer," and they'll approve the transaction. So now Nike get to get another sale, and Byron as a consumer has a positive experience. So it's like a win-win-win-win for all parties. And then how FlexCharge generate income is they'll charge 15% to Nike. So if the shoes are $100, they'll give Nike $85 and they'll keep 15. That's how they make money. So they got into the higher risk business models, and they started to struggle a little bit, obviously, because there's higher fraud ratios and chargeback ratios and so on. They were struggling. So we've been working on them probably for 5 months on a subdivision of that called Decline Defense. And Decline Defense is essentially similar technology, except it's more focused on, again, the high risk business models, the pharmacies, the online casinos, etc., and factoring transactions for them. So exact same principle, exact same process. And it was a business that came about. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. Declines, like it's hard to comprehend the size of the numbers. So if you can imagine, take every failed credit card transaction in the world today, it's like a billion plus. Like it's the market size is phenomenally large, and FlexCharge can cure anywhere from 10 to 30% of them failed transactions with their technology. So you can imagine the size of that business. So a Decline Defense is essentially a subdivision of them, where we've done a license agreement with FlexCharge to support the high risk industry more specifically. So we'll have slightly tighter controls on the high risk business models, naturally, because we need to control risk with the card brands, and that's what Decline Defense is. So it's a license of this bigger technology, but again, an opportunity that came because of relationships we built up on over the past couple of years. That's probably the best business I've seen in a while is this one, FlexCharge and Decline Defense, in terms of like a concept and the way it works.
Awesome. Yeah, it is just like your whole journey is just one big example of like putting yourself out there, noticing the opportunities, building the relationships, and just like building upon it and just like keep moving forward. So yeah, I really think people get a lot of value from this episode. If you had to give one piece of advice to someone keen to start something and you couldn't say just start, what would you tell them?
If I had to give one piece of advice to people to get started, and I can say just get started, what would I give them? Very good question. It's hard to say, like, just don't start. What I would do is I'd firstly try to understand what type of person you are. Like, are you capable of, do you really want to be a business person? Like, try to fully understand that, like understand the risks and the complications that come with being a business person, the potential lost revenue, years of frustration, horrible days. Like, firstly, like, do you want that? And if you don't want that, well, then pick a career path that can be potentially entrepreneurial but give you a bracket of safety. But if you are like a full-on entrepreneur, you know you have it in you, you're willing to go for it, you're willing to wing it, you're willing to do all these things, then I would go and try and start a business. Like, literally, I would just try and start a business. And if you can, try and start a business that doesn't require any capital, an agency, a Google My Business type business, etc., because it'll give you the experience around business, what it takes, and hopefully when you get some success, you learn all the accountancy practices, etc. And then there's the other play where it might be a big ambitious business idea where you might need to be venture backed, for example, and that's a whole another side of the world. But ideally, if you could get a little bit of experience under you before you tackle and embark on a mission like that, it would be brilliant. So that would be my advice. Get some basic business understanding by setting up anything. It doesn't need to be too complicated at all. As simple as a Google My Business type thing. I guess that would be my advice.
Great advice. And before I end every conversation, I ask my guests if they have a question for me.
Ooh. Let me see. What excites you about your future? And if you were to start a business today or tomorrow or this month or this year, what would it be?
So what excites me about my future is I've had a few sort of pivots figuring shit out, and I feel like I'm now on the right path and heading in the right direction. It was kind of a combination of not knowing what I wanted to do and not having my shit together. And I think like moving to Hong Kong really helped with that. It like opened my eyes to like how much I don't know. So like gave me a bit more humility, and also similar to you, like although I figured this out a little bit later than you did, is like you can learn anything on YouTube, and gave me the confidence that like I can just figure anything out. So what excites me about my future is that like I feel like I'm now taking the next step. I'm going through a period of quite a lot of change, and I feel like I'm heading in the right direction, and it's giving me confidence, and I'm really eager to like start my own thing. And if I were to start a business, there's two sort of possibilities. There's the lower hanging fruit one that you just said in the advice you just gave, was like an agency type, which is was speaking to a few friends, and we're like starting a business, but it's a SaaS business that might be a bit too complicated, and we're going to see if it's possible and whether it's worth pursuing. But if it isn't, the four of us have skills in different departments where we could run a pretty good content agency like right off the bat, and it's just simple outreach, and I'm pretty sure we could get our first client pretty quickly. So there's the agency side, and then I have an idea for like a SaaS product that's quite applicable to my experience of client relationships in the specific, like writing for clients on LinkedIn. And I've got all the like features and stuff planned out. So that's another thing that I'm sort of checking out and pursuing at the moment. And so, yeah, those are the two things at the moment, but I'm really excited about them and have quite a lot of confidence that something's going to work out.
Amazing. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing it all play out.
Awesome. Thanks, Jack. Thanks for joining me today. If people want to find out more about you and all the projects you're working on, where can they do so?
Well, you can follow me on Instagram as Jack Cregan _ or you can get me on LinkedIn at Jack Cregan.
Awesome. Thanks, Jack. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Byron.
Thanks for listening. I really appreciate you making it all the way to the end. I hope you enjoyed the episode. One more quick reminder before you go. I have a weekly newsletter by the same name, Another Excuse, where I cover 4 topics: something that has changed my perception, a tool that could be useful to you, content that is actually worth consuming, and a concept that I try break down and explain. If this sounds of any interest to you and you need a kick up the arse, then you can subscribe at the link below. Thanks for joining me again, and I'll see you next week.